So here we go. We'll just kind of talk our way through hopefully what you already read or will read tonight or study, but prepare for our reading quiz, which is tomorrow. Okay. This is going to be a 2-week unit, so expect our period test to be next week, Friday. You have a couple new assignments that we haven't done yet, so over the weekend you'll have to do what I call history in the making, and it's a scan from a book, and you have to write a 300 to 500 word response to it. I don't think it's overly hard, and kind of fun, but we'll get to that on Friday. And then next Monday we'll do 6 degrees of separation, which is an activity I like, so just be ready for that. Okay, TJ, can you see it all right? Do I need to tip you some more? Maybe point you down a little bit? You good?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, so there's your book. This is chapter 3. It's right from it, so we'll just run through it and I'll highlight things I think are significant. So they're going to talk about the Protestant Reformation leading into Puritanism, and specifically as the Reformation basically producing Puritanism. So they're going to talk about Martin Luther, John Calvin, Calvinism, predestination. What do you guys know about that? Like, have you covered this in the Bible?
We just started.
Just started? Okay. So, give me some details.
Talking about how Martin Luther didn't actually intend it for it to be the Reformation. Martin Luther was just like, hey, like, this is kind of my thoughts. Like, what do we think about this?
Yep.
He wasn't like trying to like reform the world or whatever. And then like he wasn't the only one. There was some like other people, like some guy that I can't pronounce his name. It's like
Zwingli? You talking about Zwingli?
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
All right.
Him, and he like did different things, and they like some people formed churches, some people just like spoke on it, and there was different people that did different things.
Okay. Good. Anything else?
After
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So to go further into it, you had all of them followed Martin Luther's example after he got on the trial of Burns, and then he was cast out. And they're like, okay, this isn't good. We're gonna pull back to Adam and Rome, and that caused the different theologies that we have today regarding Christianity. And John Calvin was part of that within that time period. He was like, okay, so everything that we do is already known, therefore everything that we're going to do is also already known. So where you're going to heaven or hell is already determined.
Okay. That's getting us into predestination and Calvinism. Good. We got okay. So, and Calvin would technically be what we call a second generation reformer. So he's like a generation after Martin Luther. And so why this is important, why it's coming up in U.S. history, is because of this. Basically, Luther starts the Protestant Reformation. Calvinism comes out of that. And Calvin, as he goes in and studies, he produces a book called The Institutes of Christian Religion. He writes it first, I think, like in his 20s, and then he just keeps adding to it. It becomes this massive book. But we're going to get this doctrine of Calvinism, which is also called predestination. Well, it teaches predestination, and it's sometimes called Reformed theology. So the reason why it's important is many churches will adopt this, and the Puritans especially will be reformed, and that will impact a lot of New England. Okay, so what is predestination? Some people, not quite.
like it's basically God chooses who goes down
Okay.
before the world
So
is
it's
established where you're going, and you can't change it.
Good, predetermined, okay? So God predetermines who goes to heaven and hell. I remember when I first heard this teaching, I reacted very strongly against it. Then I studied the scriptures, and I was like, shoot, like there's a lot in there for it, so how do I understand it? It's a great topic. You have to, as you go deeper into Christianity, you're going to have to wrestle with this at some point. You've got basically Calvinists, Reformed theology on one side. Anybody know the other side? Arminianism. Good, okay. Which is confusing because there's a place called Armenia. So when I was in Egypt, someone said I looked Armenian, and I thought they meant like not predestination. I'm like, how do I look that way? And then I realized they thought I was from the country of Armenia. So Arminianism is free choice, free will, believing that God does not predetermine, you get to choose. And those are the two sides of it. But the Puritans will primarily be Calvinistic, and that's going to impact a lot on the First Great Awakening and everything. So Moving on, Protestant Reformation produces Puritanism. King Henry VIII breaks from the Catholic Church. You guys know that. We've talked about my mug, right? With the heads that disappear. Okay. So he wants to divorce his wife. Can't. Pope says no. So he's like, well, I'm going to become the Pope then of my own church. That's when we get the Anglican Church. So the Anglican Church is also known as the Church of England. Two names for it. In America, it's called the Episcopalian Church. However, it only becomes called that after the Revolutionary War because they wanted to stay in the Anglican Church, but obviously if you just revolted against England, it's hard to be the Church of England, so they call them Episcopalians now today. So we end up down here with basically two kind of responses to the Anglican Church. Since King Henry's main purpose in starting the Church of England was to divorce his wife, he didn't really care much for the theology. And so the Church of England will stay very, very close to Roman Catholicism, and too close for many Protestants involved in it. And so you're going to end up with two groups, Puritans and Separatists. Puritans are basically reformers who want to purify the Anglican Church. In my U.S. history class, I have them do this thing where I set up a scenario in which they're in college and they're going to a church, and then the church starts teaching some funny theology, and they have to decide, well, do you stay in the church and try to fix it, or do you leave the church? And I do that to set up this, because the Puritans say, we're staying in the Anglican Church, and we're going to reform it. The Separatists say, you can't stay in there, you got to break away from it. And so those are the two groups we get. Puritans, obviously, are called Puritans. The Separatists will have kind of a couple groups, but specifically the Pilgrims will be Separatists. So when the Pilgrims come over, they are Separatists. And so where we get down here, so King James I is threatening to basically persecute them. And so we get the first Separatists fleeing to Holland in the early 1600s. They're there 10, 15 years. And then some Separatists, who become known as the Pilgrims, hear about this London company that is trying to start a colony in Virginia. And they're like, we'll do that. We'll jump on board. And so about 33 of them jump aboard the Mayflower. 100 people in total, about 33 are Pilgrims. And they sail to the New World. They're supposed to land in Virginia, get blown off course, end up in Massachusetts, where they have to weather the storm, and only half of them survive the first winter. However, what's very significant for us in Apush land is this Mayflower Compact. Basically, the reason it's so significant is this right here. Basically, it's a government submit to the will of the majority under some regulations, a form of representative government of democracy. Now, it's 100 people. They sign the Mayflower Compact. Half of them die. You know, we're not talking like a major government here, but historians love to say, hey, this is the idea, okay? We see it here with the Mayflower Compact, some other places, the House of Burgesses, this idea of representative government, of democracy. Okay? Questions? Good on that slide? Charles I, let's skip that. He'll begin persecuting Puritans. Now, Jonathan Winthrop, no. Why am I missing Winthrop's first name? I think it's Jonathan Winthrop. Shoot. That's terrible when you're the teacher and you can't remember the guy's first name in front. The last name's much more important, so. Winthrop. Jonathan? John Winthrop, thank you. John Winthrop is he sees the writing on the wall with Charles I. He's a Puritan in England, and he's like, I think persecution's coming. And so when the king opens up a Massachusetts Bay colony, he volunteers to kind of be the mayor of this colony. He sees it as a safe haven for Puritans, and he gets about 1,000 people to join him. And so when the Pilgrims came over, it was one boat, and it was about 100 people. Half of them don't survive the winter. When the Puritans come with Winthrop, it's 11 boats and 1,000 people. So much more established. They come over, they start the city of Boston. They'll quickly grow because of this great migration as Charles I and subsequent kings persecute Puritans. They just see this place as, hey, this is where we're going to go to. It's a safe place to go to. So, well, let me see. Yeah, we'll go here. So we get William Bradford in Plymouth. He's in charge of the Pilgrims. Thank you. John Winthrop is down here, is up in just north of them. very close in Massachusetts. Winthrop very strongly believed they had a calling from God to start this colony. This is definitely not like Virginia, where they just were coming to make money. We see primarily men coming, young men coming. Here we got whole families coming, and they believed strongly they had a covenant with God, a calling from God to be a city on a hill. My on level, they have to memorize this verse for their first chapter. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand and gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. That's Matthew 5. Very much, Winthrop gives a speech, and in this speech he quotes from this, saying, hey, this is who we're going to be. We're going to be this city on a hill, light to the nations. God is calling us to this new world. And this is where we get two very different kind of purposes in founding the colonies. Up in New England, it is religious, it is missional, it is like Israel of old. We're going to be a light to the nations. In the southern colonies, it's let's make money, and that's why they're coming. So two very different purposes. So we'll talk about this a bit, but there are some Christians that are very strong, like, hey, we're a Christian nation. We were founded on Christian principles. And yes, that's true in New England. In the South, they're founded on capitalistic principles of let's make money. And so that's very much part of our founding as well.
Wow, that makes so much sense.
Right? They just kind of merge together.
That just makes, like,
I think he's a good looking dude. He's got like a beanie on and a nice goatee. So, good looking Winthrop. Let's see. Bay Colony's not a democracy. The franchise, do we know that phrase? What's it mean, the franchise? Don't know that phrase? Okay. The franchise is the right to vote. So when someone's given the franchise, they're given the right to vote. If they're disenfranchised, they're not allowed to vote. So we get to the Civil War, Reconstruction, African Americans are given the right to vote, but Jim Crow laws in the South constantly trying to disenfranchise them. So you had to be Puritan. If you're a free man who had land, you could vote. If you didn't, if you're unchurched, you couldn't vote. If you're a non-believer or believer, you paid taxes to the government to support the church. Early on, all pastors were paid by the government. And there will be no separation of church and state up here. Like there's no religious freedom. You come, you need to be Puritan, and like if you don't go to church, you'll get fined, and things like that.
Where was the law that was like you can only vote if you were a white man who owned land?
Pretty much throughout the early history of America.
Okay.
So it starts to change. They drop the land early on, but prior to being...
So it goes from like being a church man to being one that owns property.
Yes. Yeah. And you're going to start to learn about the halfway covenant and things they do to kind of mitigate that. So, Anne Hutchinson, you want to know? So I'm just going to jump right down here. And her antinomianism. You want to know her, and you got to know this term for Apush. She will challenge Puritan, basically the Puritan aristocracy who's in charge of it. Antinomianism means against the law. So basically, what she taught, she challenged, predestination, but then just a general, like, you need to obey the law. So in the Gospels, we see this happen early on. As Paul and others are preaching salvation through Christ and grace through his blood, and your sins are covered. Early on in the epistles, and in I think 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, I think 1st John, John writes about this, about people who then begin saying, well, if Christ has covered all my sin, I can sin as much as I want. And that's kind of the route that Anne Hutchinson went, saying, you don't need to obey the law of God, you don't need to obey the law of man. Grace covers everything. And so because of that, she'll get cast out, and because she's a woman, trying to tell men what to do, she'll get cast out, she'll get thrown out of Massachusetts Bay Colony. I think she goes to Rhode Island for a bit. Yeah, there it is. And then she goes to New York, where her family gets killed by Native Americans. But you got to know Anne Hutchinson and this, because she's a woman and she's standing up to it, and then this teaching kind of standing up to Puritan teachings. Next guy you got to know is Roger Williams. So they kind of go together, two figures you should know from this time. He's an extreme separatist. When he rolls into Puritan New England, he's a pastor, and he immediately even though he's in Puritan New England, begins teaching separatist policies, like, hey, we have to break from the Church of England. He said all Anglicans were drunkards and whores, which Winthrop responds to and says, they're weaker brothers that we need to help. We don't break away from the church. Roger Williams says no. He said, hey, the king can't, Roger Williams says, how can the king give you this land? This isn't his land. He can't just say it's his land and give it to you. It's the Native Americans' land. So he challenges their charter. He doesn't think you should combine church and state. He was actually said, the Holy Spirit should convict someone to go to church. The state shouldn't step in and make you go to church. So it's interesting. I like Roger Williams a lot. And yet we go to Valley. And so here we make you go to chapel. We make you do things. Now you choose to come to Valley. Slightly different than a government you're born into. You know what you're getting into when you come. But when I was in my early school, when I was the head of the spiritual life department, that's always what I struggled with was, I got to make you guys do this, because the one time I did a chapel, I said voluntary chapel. You can go and hang out here, or you can come to chapel. I got about 30% of my students, I was like, okay, that's what I thought. That's when I realized I need to somehow balance forcing guys to go because it's good, and then give you optional activities where you can get deeper with Christ. And it's just kind of that balance. And that's the struggle here. And Roger Williams is on the side of, hey, let's let them choose. So he gets put on trial, and he's convicted of dangerous opinions and seditious letters. So, in America today, can you be convicted of a dangerous opinion?
I don't think so.
What about a seditious letter? No. If you wrote a letter saying you're gonna assassinate the president, yes, okay, you could get in trouble for that. But for the most part, you can write what you want, say what you want. Freedom of speech, okay?
Even then, most people like right now, go on TikTok, everyone's writing letters to the president and saying that like writing sarcastic fairy comments about him dying.
Mm-hmm. So even that, when you get to that point, that's where you can get in trouble. But if they're doing it on TikTok, I'm sure.
TikTok comments.
Yeah. So I like to bring this up because Puritan New England is not freedom of speech. It's not freedom of religion. It's clearly church and state together, which has never worked. Historically, when Christians have tried to legislate Christianity, whether it be Charlemagne or even John Calvin back in Geneva, you don't have revivals. You don't have a vibrant faith, in my opinion. So Williams goes off. He starts Rhode Island, which the Puritans called a sewer over there. He'll build a Baptist church, freedom of religion, even for Jews and Catholics. First colony to do so. People could come and he'd take care of them. He pays Native Americans for the land at a fair price, not just some beads and stuff. And so we get Rhode Island, and it'll become basically the most liberal colony and also the most stubborn, annoying colony. When we get to the Constitution, they hold out, man. They hold out to the other states, tell them, if you don't sign the Constitution, you're going to be your own country. We're done with you. They're like, fine. So the smallest state in even then, but in the Union now, was the most annoying early on because they're just so individualistic in really cool ways, but still kind of annoying to the rest of the colony sometimes. All right, let's see. Let's go on. I'll let you read about the fundamental orders in Connecticut. It's a modern constitution, another thing we look at with the Mayflower Pact and the House of Burgesses. So Powhatan down in Virginia. In the north, we're going to have the Pequot and the Wampanoags. Will be the people up there. We'll have the Pequot War. Make sure you know, Massasoit showed up on the last test. He's the leader of the Wampanoags. When he passes, it will be his son who takes over, whose name is Metacom, but the English call him King Philip. So you're going to have King Philip's War, which is basically the English against the Native Americans. Kind of tricky because he sounds like an English king, but he's not. He's a Native American king who they call King Philip. They did try to Christianize them, so this is early 1600s. So they will have these praying towns where they try to take the gospel to them. We won't see that many Native American missions really start up until the 1700s, but we'll talk about that when I preach on the Great Awakening. Let's see. Other things you should know. New Netherlands. like early on when we look at this, it's primarily, we've got the Spanish here, we got the French for the Mississippi and the Great Lakes, and then the English along the eastern starboard with the Spanish down in Florida. However, you got this little patch of the Dutch here, New Netherlands. Again, Netherlands is confusing because the Netherlands, if you're from the Netherlands, you're Dutch, but you're from the Netherlands, like it doesn't line up. So it's one of those confusing countries there. But they created a colony in Manhattan, the island of Manhattan. Eventually, Charles II just says to his brother, I'm going to give you that area. So he kind of sails in to this New Amsterdam, New Netherland, and he basically says, surrender. And they say, can we stay? And he says, okay. And then boom, New Netherlands becomes New York. So with that, you'll basically have English control from Maine, which is in control of by Massachusetts, all the way to the Carolinas. Soon you'll have Georgia come in as the buffer colony to Spanish Florida. Pennsylvania, I love Pennsylvania. I pretty much grew up there, but I think it's also a very interesting colony early on. It is the Keystone State, it's right in the middle. And so it started by William Penn and the Quakers, which is also known as the Society of Friends, which is just a great name for a church. Which do you think they call themselves? Quakers or Society of Friends? Society of Friends, okay? People call them Quakers because the leader of the Society of Friends, George Fox, he had basically an idea that you're going to have no pastors. So in the church, there is no pastor. They show up, they pray, they worship, and they wait for the Holy Spirit to come on one of them to lead them to give a message. And so people made fun of them, calling them Quakers, because they're afraid and shaking, waiting for God to come and talk to them. Today, they still exist. There's a very liberal branch of it and a more conservative branch of it. The liberal branch doesn't really believe in salvation through Christ's blood or the scriptures. They've just become very liberal and pacifistic and on that side. The other side is still pacifistic, but much more committed to Christ. I went to a Quaker meeting house because I had a student that went. It was very interesting because I wanted to experience it, and it was the more liberal kind. And this was back when George Bush was president. And so in the meeting, like after we sang and then they waited, every message that came from God was against George W. Bush. That's very interesting to me. Like every sermon, mini sermon everyone gave was how terrible George Bush was. And I was like, well, that's interesting. God would just lead us all in that. But that's how it went. So that's the Quakers. They're going to be in Pennsylvania. William Penn becomes a Quaker, and basically he gets persecuted for that. However, the king owed him land. So you can write this all down if you want. But again, a lot of this is coming straight from your textbook. So don't feel like you have to. Like as you read it, you'll be like, wow, that was on the slide. Yeah, this is the PowerPoint for it. So he's getting persecuted for his faith, his Quaker faith in England. However, the king owed his father money. And so when his father died, William Penn said, why don't you just give me land in the New World? Which to the king is a great deal, right? Because he doesn't really own it anyway, so he just gives it away. So William Penn takes it. He gets land from the king. He's going to call it Penn's Woods, which is Pennsylvania. And he will come in, despite the king giving him the land, he'll still go in and pay the Native Americans for it. I like that about William Penn. I like his Quaker background. He will have it'll be the second religious freedom colony. You did have to believe in one God, but as long as you did, you could come to this colony. The best advertised colony, he starts sending notices throughout Europe, inviting people to come. That's why you're going to get a bunch of Mennonites and Amish, Quakers, Baptists, all kind of coming to this area that are being persecuted in different places. So, that's why today, where I went to school was in Lancaster County, which our claim to fame was the Amish. Like, people would go on vacations to see the Amish. It was always odd to me. But we were a tourist destination because we had people that drove horse and buggies around and farmed. But people would come to see them. So I like Pennsylvania for many reasons.
I feel like imagine like you are Amish.
Yep.
People just like come to see you.
Yes.
Like imagine like someone just come into your house and they're like, using the stove.
Yep. Well, they basically started making like Amish tours, like places you could go and watch the Amish, and they kind of worked with them and stuff. It's very.
That's so weird.
It was totally weird. It was totally weird. So, the main issue with Pennsylvania moving forward will be among the Quakers. Let's see. We're gonna skip some of this. Mainly, what I want you to know is their pacifism. Quakers are pacifists, which means they don't believe in war. They don't believe in violence. So, when it came to the Revolutionary War, this became a difficult point for those in Pennsylvania. And we're going to watch a series called John Adams. It's made by HBO, super good. And you're going to see in this kind of battle between this Continental Congress, the group that's holding it up is Pennsylvania and a Quaker who does not want to go to war against the king because he's a pacifist, doesn't believe in war. And so there's that struggle between for the other colonies. They're like, you won't fight with us. And that's going to cause a rub in general at the continental level, Continental Congress level, but also elsewhere. All right, so the rest of yours is yours to learn on your own. We got almost to the end. That's good.
It's not a show, it's like a cartoon, it follows those little kids.
I don't know what you're talking about. You good, TJ?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, reading quiz tomorrow. All right.
History,
See ya.